So I'm going to spend a few minutes now talking about group norms and cohesion. So first, let's talk about group norms. I think you've probably heard of this before, right? Social norms, the idea is just these informal or unwritten rules adopted by groups to regulate behavior, right? So this is kind of the expected behaviors. The classic group norm is after the first day of classes, right? Everybody sits down when we meet in person. Everybody sits down the first day, and then what happens the next time? Everybody sits in the same seat. What happens next time? Everybody sits in the same seat. And if you move to a different seat, everybody gets really upset. Why? Because they have this expectation of behavior. We really like to understand our world, and it really bothers us when the world doesn't behave the way it's supposed to. And so these group norms develop that really dictate our behaviors, right? This is another example of how being in a group can impact our behaviors. So, where do group norms come from? They can certainly come from the higher organization, either an external organization or the next higher level up organization, right? So, when I refer to that norm of where everybody sits in class day after day and always sit in the same seat, that is a norm throughout the schools, right? So each classroom also adapts that norm, right? It comes down from the higher organization, sometimes as a leader through policy. And in the future, we're going to talk about how leaders embed culture. And part of it is through establishing norms through policy and through punishment and rewards. This is also a way that norms are established. Norms also can come from teammates, right? And so it's not just the leader. In fact, it may be more often from teammates establishing norms than it would be from a leader establishing norms, right? And so the teacher doesn't come in and say, you all have to sit in this same spot week after week. I mean, some may, I'll admit, some may, but not all. And even when they don't, it's the teammates who are really creating and enforcing this norm. And what's important here is that credibility of a role model for how we behave. Another time this comes into place is when we are new to a team. When we are the new ones, what do we do to look around? We look to see what everyone else is doing. This is going to be important for you as a JO because when someone enters your unit, they're not going to look to you or to the captain or to the colonel to tell them how to behave. They're going to look to their closest other, right? So that new seaman apprentice is going to come on, might look to a third class petty officer, but they're not going to look to the chief for the kind of unwritten rules and learning the ropes of how to behave. And so same thing, that new private or lance corporal is going to be looking to other lance corporals. It's going to be looking to the sergeants, not going to be looking to the first sergeant, not going to be looking to the platoon commanders about how exactly to behave. And so that's an important concept that teammates, and this is again what I was talking about, the informal organization. Norms really come as a informal process of behavioral enforcement. Norms can also arise from past situations, right? And so we always do it this way because this happened, right? So typically we see this is kind of coupled with critical events. So maybe we failed a major inspection, and so now we make sure that we always check this one thing, right? And that becomes a norm to always check on that thing before, all the time, because this one time that it failed because we didn't check. That's a classic case of how a norm develops over time. An important concept in this is the idea of primacy. That first movements are really important. And so when a team is meeting, right, and that forming, storming, that's where norms are being developed. It's right in those first moments. So the first time a team meets is really important for establishing the norms that are going to exist throughout the team's entire existence until somebody steps in and changes it. Right. So again, that example of where we sit the first day really matters. You have a team meeting and somebody shows up late and nobody says anything and it's kind of blown off as okay. Then you know what? Now you have a team norm that it's okay to show up late, right? Or somebody shows up late and everybody gives them some feedback and says, hey, when you show up late, here's what happens. It makes us all have to be here longer and it kind of impedes the work. Could you show up on time next time? And that's from then on, people are going to show up on time and you're going to have a different kind of norm that comes out of that. So the first moments, and this is a really important takeaway from norms, the first moments that a team is together really starts to establish those norms because we get this imprint of behavioral expectations. So the things that we do first really do make a big difference. This also, means that things last for reasons that nobody knows, just because it was the way we did things first, right? So one of the sayings that you'll often hear, at least in the Navy, is, well, we're not going to do a thing because, we've always done it this way. Because frankly, that really comes out. And that's kind of an example of how norms can be pervasive, this idea that we've always done it this way. Nobody really knows why. We just always have, right? Maybe we did it from the very first moment and it just kind of carried on and got entrained into the system. Now, that's how norms are created. How do norms get sustained? First of all, they have to be communicated, right? We learn norms through two ways. One is direct communication. Someone tells us, hey, this is how we do things around here, right? Maybe you can imagine the salty sailor putting her arm around the new guy saying, okay, let me tell you how things really work around here, right? That's direct communication of norms. We also get it through social observation. And again, it's this social identity coming back where we look for a model that's similar to us. And I talked about this a little bit already, the idea of power distance. Those who are closer to us in power distance are going to have a stronger influence on norm creation and on communicating norms to us through social observation. Now, that has a limit, right? So as a leader, sometimes we can create a norm or sustain a norm by either ignoring it, so we get this tacit approval from the commander, or by kind of embedding our culture into it, embedding our policies, etc., that can really enforce a norm or help to take apart a norm. So it's not like leaders don't have a role here. It just takes a very intentional role, because when they don't, then it's really people who are closer to us that are going to make a difference. So some norms are more powerful than others. So if we want to talk about which norms are the most powerful, ones that clarify what is distinct about a group's identity. Right, so we all behave this way because that's what makes us a group. That's what makes us special. That's what distinguishes us from others. That can be really important. Things that facilitate group survival. Like I said earlier, those the norms that come out of critical incidents where we almost failed. Those are going to be really important because they are going to be seen as enhancing and facilitating group survival overall. Norms that set very clear expectations of behavior, right? And help us, because they help us avoid those embarrassing interpersonal problems. Like, nobody wants to be embarrassed. Nobody wants to do the wrong thing and break the unwritten rule that everybody else knows about, but you don't know about, right? And we're all kind of afraid, especially when we first join a group and we're not really part of that process of developing the norms. This is a real fear because we don't want to be socially embarrassed. And so norms that are going to clarify what it is that we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to act, and how we can avoid being embarrassed are the ones that are going to be the most powerful. Now, I want to break a little bit and we'll come back to norms, but I want to talk about cohesion. We often hear about cohesion, and cohesion defined is the sum of forces that attracts members to a group, provides resistance to leaving it, and motivates them to achieve in it, right? So cohesion is like the stickiness in the group, right? It's right there in that word, a cohesion word, but it's people who want to be a part of the group, right? And they're really motivated to do things on behalf of the team. And they're willing to even give up part of themselves on behalf of the team. That's a sign of a very cohesive group, one there was a lot of stickiness to the group. People like to be a part of it. They want to be a part of it. That's cohesion. You'll often hear in the military about how important unit cohesion is. So it's important as a leader in the military to understand what unit cohesion is and why it's important. So high degrees of cohesiveness actually strengthen norms, right? So and this can have different aspects, right? So sometimes a high cohesion may actually be a bad thing. When it's a good thing is if we have a norm for high performance, then the more cohesion we have, the higher we're going to perform, right? And so we think of, the SEALs or Force Recon or ideas, these very elite performing teams, they tend to be marked by two things: high cohesion, people really want to be on that team and like being part of that team, but also a bend for high performance. On the other hand, if we have a norm that favors low performance or detrimental performance or unethical performance, cohesion is also going to drive that norm. And that's where sometimes we get into trouble with an overly cohesive teams. This can actually be detrimental. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Cohesion really can help sustain the team, right? So when the team's getting down, it helps us build this resilience because, like I said earlier, teams, being part of team makes us more competitive. We want to do things on behalf of the team. We want our team to succeed. A more cohesive team, we're going to want them to succeed even more. It increases our commitment to the team. So it helps the team sustain through challenge and longer term performance. And look, there's a cyclical process between cohesion and performance, a cyclical relationship where high levels of performance lead to higher levels of group cohesion. Everybody likes to be on a winning team, right? And then that higher level of cohesion leads then to higher levels of performance. It's this nice like cyclical spiral that builds on itself to build both cohesion and performance over and over reciprocally. Now, I kind of alluded to this. There are dangers with cohesion. Let's talk about what some of those are. The first one I'm going to talk about is overbounding. This is a kind of a fancy word for these barriers to relying on anyone else, right? And so if we imagine at the individual level, right, that very independent individual who never wants to ask for help. At the team level, a very cohesive team can get to that same place where they never want to look to outside people for help. And even beyond that, overbounding really gets to the point where not only do we not seek it out, we don't accept it because we're concerned about the effect that it's going to have on the group, right? We want to maintain the boundaries of the group because they're so important to us. It's overbounding, right? We want to maintain at all costs the boundaries of that group. This can also lead to groupthink, right? And the problem with groupthink is when the cohesion of the group becomes more important than coming to a quality decision. And when that happens, you get people who are no longer allowed to question the group's decision because, or where the group is headed, not because the ideas are bad, but because if we go in a different direction, it has the possibility of breaking apart the group in some way. It might create some conflict in the group. And now cohesion of the group is so important that we just go down this path, right? And there's lots of examples of groupthink out there. Just Google Bay of Pigs invasion and groupthink, and you'll see a ton of things there. But the idea here is that cohesion can be detrimental when it prevents us from having conflict and good, arguments, solid, constructive arguments about what we're supposed to be doing so we can come to the best ideas. Too much cohesion can also create what's called Aliism. And Aliism is named after Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who was a key figure, Naval Academy graduate, and key figure during the Iran-Contra scandal. But this was a man who was, it seems, and I don't think anybody knows the exact truth, but it seems that he did not get ordered to go commit crimes, but he thought that he understood that he was supposed to. And so Aliism refers to this dysfunctional actions taken in the mistaken belief that they meet the intent of supervisors. And then this can be a big problem, especially if you have an abusive supervisor. But even when you don't, this actually makes it so as a leader, you get out of control about what's expected because people start to think they can read your mind and you just can't ask them to do this thing. Cohesion is an important factor in promoting Aliism. And then lastly, and look, there's others, but the last one that we're going to discuss here, cohesion can breed in-group and out-group fault lines, right? And these social fault lines that occur not just within a group, right? So cohesion would actually reduce the fault lines within the group, but they certainly strengthen the fault lines without groups, right? And this goes again to that same discussion about overbounding. In this idea, this group with very strong cohesion, they tend to then really promote people in group and try and protect the group. And then there's denigration of members of the out group. So it really is going to strengthen that effect. So as a leader, we have to be really important. We have to really pay attention to what it means to be cohesive and what the dangers are being too cohesive and what norms are going to be going to be exacerbated by cohesion. So what can we do as leaders to avoid these dangers of cohesion? First of all, critical thinking, right? That's an important piece to this. A lot of the problems with over cohesion is about these cognitive biases that are created. Critical thinking is an important piece of this. So the leader has to be a critical thinker and also has to encourage others to think critically. There also needs to be an atmosphere of psychological safety in the group. The leader really has to promote voice, that is allowing individuals, not just allowing, but encouraging individuals to speak up and to speak out, right? So a classic way to encourage voice is by the leader giving the last opinion instead of the first opinion, and letting everybody else say their opinion, and then not denigrating anyone's opinion, but actually listening to it and incorporating it into their ideas in a true way. And really to develop a group norm around that, around people having this questioning attitude, is really, and building a psychologically safe environment where they can do that. And then actively looking for counterfactuals. This is going to be an important thing, right? Scanning for alternative ideas. Too often, especially when we have very cohesive groups and we get into this groupthink, we can just go down this path where we think everything that we're doing is right. And so we have to actively look for counterfactuals, things that are going to prove us wrong. Sometimes this means getting out of our own head, because cognitive biases and confirmation bias are going to make this even harder, and actually assigning a devil's advocate in order to come up with alternatives and different ideas, and making sure that that person is celebrated and not denigrated for the actions that they take. So look, cohesion and norms, they go hand in hand, and it's really important that cohesion, highly cohesive teams are really going to they're going to exacerbate norms. The good norms, that's a good thing, and that's why we really value unit cohesion. But the bad norms towards bad performance can be a problem with highly cohesive units. So you got to be careful. And cohesion brings with it a little bit of a quagmire, and we got to be careful about what's going on there. So leaders have to be intentional about not just building the team and not just building cohesion, but also making sure to protect against the dangers of cohesion.